Hi guys, so the TCA, or the Trade and Cooperation Agreement that was signed off by Boris Johnson last December, as we know, has created a bit of a headache for Brexiteers. Now, Sir William Cash, who is the current chair of the European Scrutiny Committee, invited on some experts and some MPs to discuss the issues rising from it. A big problem for Brexiteers in government is that they have agreed to things in the withdrawal agreement and separate things in the TCA. There has been an attempt to use whatever they can to undermine the withdrawal agreement, which of course contains the Northern Ireland Protocol. Anyway, I want to let you hear a question that was asked of a WTO and EU law expert, Dr Lorand Bartels, at the University of Cambridge. He went into some detail about the possible ways the UK or the EU could retaliate if they see the other side not upholding their side of the bargain. The term used is cross-retaliation. It is complex, although Brexiteers will like the sound of it. However, they tend to forget that the EU has access to such mechanisms as well.
I used to be a magistrate for many years, and if someone had a suspended sentence for something and they've come back for another infringement of some sort, the general rule was you couldn't really enact the suspended sentence for something that was completely different on the sort of different offence. You could, but you generally didn't. That was the practice. Now, is the TCA as prescriptive that, say we have a row about fishing, and that is settled one way, or no, not settled, or maybe it's settled, but decide to go up the, well, we don't care less, which then allows a mechanism of retaliation. Has the retaliation got to be in that very strict same field? And who will be the arbiter to say, well, this was about fishing and you've suddenly expanded it to digital services? Where's the arbiter going to be on that it's an unfair, new process yeah?
So we've heard this issue before, how the UK government were willing to retaliate against some other industry. For example, as he's raising here in the question about fishing, the UK government had said in the past, if the EU don't allow us to, or if they demand that we hand over our fishing rights to the European Union, language like this, what we'll do instead is we're going to hit their exports. We're going to stop them from exporting BMWs into the UK, or something like that. We've heard this argument before. Now, it hasn't seemed to have transpired, because Boris Johnson and his chief negotiator David Frost negotiated a terrible deal for the fishing communities. But are they going to retaliate? Well, let's hear the answer to that.
Yep, that's an excellent question. So the term that is used in WTO law for this is cross-retaliation. You suffer a violation in one sector, say trade in goods, and then the question is, can you retaliate by suspending obligations in intellectual property or trade in services, for instance? And there is a lot of cross-retaliation that can be done in the TCA. It's very prescriptive about when you can do this, when you can't do this. There are some areas which are self-contained. With fishing in the Channel Islands, for instance, it is self-contained. With financial services, it is self-contained. But in other areas, it is not self-contained. I can't go through it all now. It's not the right time to sort of outline exactly where this works. But in principle, the rule for cross-retaliation, which is carried over here, and again, there are numerous carve-outs, exceptions, and so on, is that you are allowed to cross-retaliate if it is not effective or practicable, and the circumstances are serious enough for you to cross-retaliate, essentially. In other words, not in the sector in which you've suffered the violation. That is a subjective test, but it's not unbounded. And there is actually quite a lot of WTO case law on that terminology. It comes from the WTO. What does it mean for retaliation in the same sector not to be practicable or not to be effective? When are the circumstances serious enough for you to be able to move on and suspend services or aviation in exchange for violation of a fishing obligation or something? So we're not flying completely blind there, but there is an element of subjective discretion and obviously this is a fairly major issue. I mean, the one other thing I might say is that, because you're mentioning, reactivating a suspended sentence, what's also important to note is how the retaliation stick is, how one measures that. How much do you get to retaliate by? And what's been adopted is a very WTO-based model, which is to say you look at the damage, you try and quantify the damage in dollar per year terms. I don't know what the currency would be, but that's how you do it in the WTO. And then the size of your retaliatory stick is the same, essentially. So if you've suffered, say there's discrimination or something, and your businesses have suffered a loss of market access, you get the economists to figure out how much that damage is worth. And then if the other side doesn't comply, your sanction is calculated again by the economists. By now they're making it up a little bit because you don't really know those hypotheticals, but they do the job as best they can. That's the size of your stick. And that's how you're entitled to hit the other side. It doesn't always work because sometimes the stick is economically, not very much. And it might mean more to you. It might be your fishermen, for instance, not that economically important, but politically very important. The problem is that the size of your stick is not very much, and yet you want to be able to do something. And it's in that sort of situation when cross-retaliation really comes to the fore. So you can press on a politically more sensitive area to get the other side to comply, even though it might not be economically overall that important.
So it's very interesting concept. And do I think that the UK government will attempt to use it? Of course they will. The value of it, and he's laid it out quite clearly here, is political. Its economic value is quite limited, but its political value is substantial. So you could easily see a situation once again where the fishing communities are suffering, and Boris Johnson's government attempts to use this cross-retaliation to harm some industry in the European Union, being cheered on by Brexiteers to do so. As he said here, the stick may not be large economically, but it could be substantial politically. Now, it hasn't happened yet, which is interesting. Boris Johnson hasn't decided to wield the stick yet. I don't know why that's the case. Now, when it comes to the fishing industry, it's probably not a very good example to use because the fishing industry have been thrown under a bus by the Brexiteers. The TCA, the results of the TCA for the fishing community have been terrible, but that was a decision made by Boris Johnson's government. Now, while Brexiteers may be trying to pick this one apart, trying to find some nugget within this, okay, how can we retaliate against the European Union? For example, on the issue of fishing, we're not able to export our shellfish into the EU. This is damaging us. We're going to retaliate by, blocking BMWs or German cars into the UK. It seems that maybe that's not possible using that example, but there could be other areas that could be used as a stick as well. But the fundamental problem here as well is that something that Brexiteers seem to forget is that the EU can use this as well. There are two sides to the TCA. There's the UK and there's the European Union. So any stick that the UK would attempt to wield against the European Union could easily be wielded against the UK by the European Union itself. And it could result in seeing some type of tit for tat where one retaliates against the other and the victim retaliates against the attacker. I don't see it happening at the moment because there isn't a real benefit politically for Boris Johnson to do so. Now, what's interesting is there has been this type of language of retaliation in regards to the Northern Ireland Protocol. So the UK government is not upholding its side of the agreement when it comes to the Northern Ireland Protocol. So they have been attempting to look at the TCA and see, okay, what aspects of the TCA can we undo in order to extract concessions from the European Union. And as I said before, this has been attempted in the past. last year when Boris Johnson was agreeing the agreement, signing the agreement, negotiating the agreement with the European Union, there was an attempt to extract concessions from Europe, from Brussels, by attempting to undermine the withdrawal agreement and the Northern Ireland Protocol. What's going to happen next is difficult to predict because Boris Johnson is extremely unpredictable. I think he may attempt to, as I said before, unpick some parts of the TCA for political reasons, not economic ones. It doesn't seem to be in the interest of the Conservative Party and its government to protect businesses in the UK, but it could be used as a cudgel politically against the European Union in order to drum up support towards an election or a by-election, in order once again to paint the European Union as the enemy and Boris Johnson and the Brexiteers as the heroes. Let me know in the comments section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?